when I said give it all to them in that courtroom. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind. My lawyer grabbed my arm so hard I thought she'd leave bruises, her eyes wide with disbelief. Across the table, my sister Vanessa, my father Gerald, and my mother Patricia sat with small, confident smiles, the kind winners wear before the game is even over. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I was surrendering. My lawyer leaned in close, her voice urgent and desperate. "Rachel, don't do this. We can fight this. We have evidence, we have witnesses. We can win." But I looked at them, really looked at them, and I saw nothing but greed reflected back. Years of family ties, everything my grandfather built with his own hands, reduced to a taction they wanted closed fast. So I said it again, calm and clear. Give it all to them. The room went silent. My lawyer dropped her pen, the sound echoing in the stillness. Their smiles flickered for just a second, confusion crossing their faces before widening into something uglier, triumph mixed with contempt. They exchanged glances, a silent celebration passing between them. Everyone in that room thought the same thing. Rachel Morrison had given up. Rachel Morrison was finished. But they had no idea what they were really taking. The final court hearing came weeks later. They sat there dressed like they were heading to a celebration. Vanessa in a new designer suit, my mother wearing pearls I'd never seen before, my father in expensive Italian leather shoes. They were already planning how to spend what they believed was theirs. The house, the cars, Morrison precision tools, everything my grandfather Walter had spent 50 years building. I signed every page of the transfer documents without hesitation, my hand steady, my expression blank. My lawyer, Elizabeth Grant, looked like she was attending a funeral, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment. She'd worked so hard on my case, compiled evidence, prepared arguments, and now she watched me throw it all away, or so she thought. Then the courtroom doors opened. 2 federal agents walked in, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. They approached the defense table, handed an envelope to Harrison Cole, my family's attorney. He opened it, his confident expression melting away as he read. His face went pale, the color draining so fast I could see it happen. He leaned over to Vanessa, Gerald and Patricia, and whispered 5 words into their ear. The smiles vanished. My sister screamed first, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the courtroom. My mother clutched my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. My father just stared ahead, frozen, as reality crashed down on them like a collapsing building. In that moment, I didn't look at them. I just looked at the ring my grandfather left me on my finger, the simple gold band he'd worn every day in his shop, polished smooth by decades of honest work. My name is Rachel Morrison, and this is the story of how I lost everything and won. But to understand how it came to this, I need to take you back to where it all began. I grew up in the suburbs just outside Detroit, in a quiet neighborhood where the hum of industry always lingered in the background, like a familiar song. My grandfather, Walter Morrison, founded Morrison Precision Tools in 1974, starting with nothing more than a single garage, a handful of basic equipment, and an old lathe he'd bought secondhand from a factory closing down. He believed in crafting molds and dies with absolute precision, the kind that big auto manufacturers could rely on without question, parts that fit perfectly every single time. The shop became my world early on. While other kids spent their afternoons at dance classes or soccer practice, I'd tag along with Grandpa Walter after school, perched on a worn wooden stool that he'd cut down to my size. The place carried constant scents that became as familiar as home. Sharp cutting fluid that stung your nose if you got too close, warm steel shavings that piled up like silver snow around the machines, and coffee from the ancient pot he kept brewing all day. Thick and bitter and somehow perfect. He'd demonstrate how to grip a micrometer, his calloused hands guiding my small fingers, showing me how to read the measurements down to a 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch. See this, Rachel? This little line right here, that's the difference between a part that works and a part that fails on an assembly line downtown. That's the difference between feeding a family and letting them down. Machines whirred steadily, metal chips flying in graceful arcs. The rhythmic clang of steel on steel creating a percussion that felt like a heartbeat. He shared stories during those long afternoons, his voice rising over the mechanical symphony. How he landed his first real contract with a supplier who needed custom dies fast. How the big companies had laughed at the one-man operation until he delivered perfect parts ahead of schedule. How he worked nights to meet deadlines, figuring out complex shapes that other shops said couldn't be done, teaching himself advanced techniques from borrowed textbooks and pure stubborn determination. He hired his first employee when I was 5, then another, expanding into a proper building with overhead cranes and CNC machines that cost more than houses. But he never boasted about it. He just wanted me to see that success came from reliability and effort, from keeping your word and standing behind your work no matter what. I couldn't get enough of it. While friends went to movies or hung out at the mall, I rode shotgun with Grandpa Walter on deliveries, watching him discuss blueprints with engineers at massive plants that stretched for acres. I saw him solve problems on site, tweaking a design with a pencil stub he kept behind his ear, suggesting material changes that saved time and money. Clients trusted him completely. His handshake meant more than pages of contracts and fine print. The metal felt cool under my fingers when he let me touch the finished parts. Perfectly smooth, precisely shaped. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with machine oil became the scent of safety and belonging. The sound of his laugh when I asked why we couldn't just make everything a little bigger to be safe. Explaining tolerances and engineering standards with infinite patience. As time passed, I noticed differences in how the family viewed the business. My father Gerald rarely stopped by, and when he did, he focused on the mess or the noise, wrinkling his nose at the industrial grime, checking his watch after 10 minutes. My mother, Patricia, would complain about the grease stains on Grandpa's clothes, suggesting he should just hire a manager and retire already. My sister Vanessa avoided the shop altogether, calling it dirty and outdated, saying she couldn't understand why anyone would choose to work with their hands. Grandpa Walter observed, quietly, disappointment flickering in his eyes, when family gatherings turned to discussions about the shop, and everyone except me found excuses to change the subject. He began entrusting me with real tasks. I ran small production jobs under his supervision, contacted suppliers for quotes, handled scheduling when he needed to be on the floor. He walked me through profit margins, inventory control, customer relations, the business side that was just as important as the manufacturing. More than numbers, he emphasized reputation, delivering on promises, standing behind work, treating workers fairly, paying bills on time, never cutting corners even when it would be easier and more profitable. "This isn't just about money, Rachel," he told me one quiet evening, as we locked up, surveying the clean floor and organized tools. "It's about honor. We build things that last, and we treat people right. Only you seem to get that." His words stuck with me, settled deep in my chest like an anchor. The others showed little interest in daily operations, or the challenges that came with running a precision manufacturing business. Vanessa dismissed it as manual labor, something beneath her accounting degree and corporate ambitions. My parents spoke of eventual sale or retirement windfall, never the craft or the clients or the legacy. Grandpa's confidence in me grew steadily. He included me in decisions about new tooling investments, expansion ideas, long-term contracts with major manufacturers. We spent hours reviewing technical prints, debating efficiency improvements, mapping growth strategies that wouldn't compromise the quality standards he'd built his reputation on. When his strength began to fade, when the doctor's appointments became more frequent and the bottles of medication lined his bathroom counter, he relied on me more heavily. I managed most day-to-day operations while he oversaw from his desk. Still sharp, still demanding excellence. He made certain I understood every aspect of the business, from machine maintenance schedules to financial oversight, to customer relationship management. Then came the morning he didn't show up. Heart attack, sudden and final. I got the call at 6 a.m. My phone buzzing on the nightstand. My ex-husband Derek's sister telling me they'd found him at home, already gone. The loss hit hard, knocked the air from my lungs. The shop felt silent without his presence. Even with the machines running, even with the familiar sounds and smells, something essential was missing. At the will reading, the terms were straightforward and public. He left the entire operation to me. Buildings, equipment, accounts, client relationships, intellectual property, the house he'd lived in for 40 years. Everything. He trusted I'd preserve what he'd created, carry forward the standards he'd established, honor the Morrison name. Holding those documents in the lawyer's office, grief mixed with determination created something hard and unbreakable in my chest. The responsibility felt immense, almost crushing, but I vowed to carry it forward exactly the way he intended. I owed him that much and more. But not everyone was happy about his decision. Not even close. I married young, still in my early 20s, to Derek Chen, someone I met through a project at the shop. He worked as a design engineer for one of our regular clients, and our conversations started over blueprints and tight deadlines, evolving into coffee breaks and eventually dinner dates. We bonded quickly over shared ambitions and late-night discussions about building something meaningful together. It seemed like the right step, at the time, seemed like we wanted the same things from life. Emma arrived soon after, a curious baby with wide eyes, the color of warm honey, and a quick smile that lit up every room she entered. 2 years later, Tyler joined us, a bundle of non-stop energy who kept us chasing from the moment he learned to crawl, always into something, always exploring. Those first years overflowed with discovery. First steps caught on shaky video, first words repeated endlessly with pride. Messy meals that ended in laughter and spaghetti sauce in unexpected places. The house filled with constant activity, toys spread across floors like colorful landmines. Children's drawings taped to every available wall surface. Weekends spent at local festivals or backyard barbecues with neighbors who became friends. Holidays meant traditions. We started together, decorating sugar cookies with too much frosting, building blanket forts that took over the living room, reading the same bedtime stories until the pages wore thin and I could recite them from memory. I juggled shop responsibilities with motherhood, rushing home for bedtime routines that stretched long because no one wanted the day to end, because one more story always turned into 3 more. For a stretch, everything aligned like perfectly machined parts. We planned vacations to nearby lakes, saved for bigger dreams, celebrated small wins like new contracts or Emma's first day of kindergarten. Emma's endless questions about how things worked echoed Grandpa Walter's patient lessons. Tyler's fearless climbing and constant motion reminded me of my own childhood curiosity around machines and tools, but differences surfaced gradually. Small cracks that widened over time. Derek struggled with the unpredictable hours the business demanded, urgent client fixes that kept me late, seasonal rushes when automotive manufacturers needed parts yesterday, emergency calls at midnight when a machine went down and production stopped. He wanted more predictable evenings, spontaneous weekend trips, less talk about production issues and tolerance problems and customer demands. Conversations shifted from partnership to frustration over divided attention. He felt the shop came first, that I prioritized Morrison precision tools over our family. I felt unsupported in carrying Grandpa Walter's expectations, felt alone in trying to honor a legacy that Derek saw as just a demanding job. We tried to balance it with date nights and shared chores in conscious effort, but the attempts helped only temporarily, never resolving the core mismatch between what we each needed. He saw the company as something I could walk away from, something I should walk away from for the sake of our marriage. I saw it as legacy and livelihood intertwined, responsibility and identity woven together too tightly to separate. The gap widened into a chasm, shared plans dissolved into separate routines, separate lives lived under the same roof. We attended counseling sessions, hoping neutral ground and professional guidance would bridge things, but old patterns returned within days. When Emma was in first grade and Tyler starting preschool, we agreed separation was healthier than the constant tension that filled our home like toxic smoke. The divorce process stayed civil, handled through mediation instead of courtroom battles. Custody split evenly on paper, schedules built carefully around school and work obligations. I kept the smaller house closer to the shop for stability, a modest place where the kids could stay grounded. Adjusting to single parenting brought new rhythms, new challenges. Mornings rushed with breakfasts and backpacks and missing shoes found at the last second. Afternoons filled with school pickups and homework at the dining table. Questions about why Dad lived elsewhere that I answered with age-appropriate honesty. Nights meant tucking them in alone, reading extra pages to fill quiet spaces, their small bodies pressed against mine as we journeyed through stories of dragons and princesses and brave children who solved impossible problems. I'd smooth Emma's hair back from her forehead, feel Tyler's steady breathing as he drifted off mid-sentence, and wonder if I was doing enough, being enough. Weekends offered breathing room. I'd load them into the car for outings we planned together. The zoo where Tyler fed giraffes with his small hand outstretched, laughing when their long tongues wrapped around the lettuce. Museums where Emma sketched exhibits in a notebook she carried everywhere, her artistic eye already developing. We baked together on rainy days, experimented with recipes that sometimes succeeded and sometimes burned spectacularly. But the laughter that filled the kitchen made even the failures feel like victories. I brought them to the shop occasionally, when crews were off, when the floor was empty and safe for small explorers. They touched cool metal parts with careful fingers, asked questions about the machines that I answered the way Grandpa Walter had taught me. I demonstrated simple measurements, let them trace patterns on paper, turned technical lessons into play. Emma drew imaginative designs of impossible machines. Tyler stacked scrap pieces into towers that defied gravity. Those visits strengthened our bond, created memories tied to the place Grandpa loved, helped them understand why the work mattered so much. The three of us became a tight unit, learning to navigate this new normal together. The experience reshaped my view on relationships in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. Not all connections endure, even those sealed with wedding vows and shared history. Some drift apart when priorities diverge, when fundamental needs clash in ways no amount of effort can reconcile. No villain required, just two people who wanted different things from life. It highlighted the difference between obligation and true connection, between staying because you should and staying because you want to. With the marriage behind me, my energy redirected fully toward raising Emma and Tyler, while increasing my involvement at Morrison Precision Tools, as Grandpa Walter's health declined and he needed more direct assistance. Those acknowledgments from him, the pride in his eyes when I solved a production problem or landed a difficult contract, reinforced my direction and prepared ground for what lay ahead. I didn't know it then, but those years of learning to stand alone, of finding strength in myself rather than a partnership, would become essential training for the betrayal that was coming. Because the people who hurt you most are rarely strangers. They're the ones who know exactly where to aim. After Grandpa Walter's passing, I stepped fully into running Morrison Precision Tools, carrying the weight of his legacy on shoulders that sometimes felt too small for the burden. The days blurred with responsibility, client calls at 7 a.m., production meetings at noon, quality control checks that stretched into evening. I'd get home exhausted, barely able to manage dinner and homework before collapsing into bed, only to wake up and do it all again. My parents, Gerald and Patricia, began reaching out more frequently. Phone calls turned into visits, expressions of sympathy evolving into offers of help that seemed genuine at first. My sister Vanessa joined those conversations, mentioning repeatedly how hard it must be managing alone with two young kids. How I looked tired, how I needed support. They decided to relocate closer to Detroit, finding a place only 15 minutes away. The reason sounded reasonable, logical even. Being near for Emma and Tyler, helping with school drops or unexpected needs, when work demanded my attention. I appreciated the gesture, felt a wave of relief at having family nearby. Balancing the shop's demands with parenting stretched me so thin that sleep became a luxury. Nights often cut short by overdue reports or a child's nightmare. They started appearing at Morrison Precision Tools often, too often, Gerald would walk the floor, inspecting machinery with an air of authority, suggesting minor adjustments based on vague memories from decades past when he'd visited Grandpa Walter once or twice. Patricia organized lunch deliveries for the team, lingering afterward to chat with longtime workers, asking questions about operations and profitability that seemed innocent enough. But Vanessa proved most eager to help. She noticed my exhaustion with spreadsheets and financial statements, saw me rubbing my temples after another late night reconciling accounts. She proposed taking over the financial side completely, handling bookkeeping, vendor payments, payroll, banking. "Let me take that weight off your shoulders, Rachel," she said, her smile warm and sisterly. "You focus on manufacturing and customers. That's what you're good at. Let me handle the numbers. That's what I'm good at." Worn out from constant juggling, from trying to be everywhere and do everything, I accepted. Family involvement seemed like a lifeline after years of going it alone. It allowed me to focus more on actual operations, on maintaining the quality standards Grandpa Walter had established, on keeping clients satisfied. I trusted blood ties would prevent issues, believed family loyalty ran deeper than business complications. Initial periods ran smoothly, without apparent hiccups. Bills got paid promptly. Statements arrived neatly compiled in organized folders. Bank balances seemed stable. I gained breathing space, arrived home earlier some evenings for dinners with Emma and Tyler, helped with school projects, without the constant pressure of unfinished financial work hanging over me. But gradually, small irregularities began appearing like hairline cracks in a foundation. Significant outgoing payments for items outside normal operational categories, large sums labeled vaguely as supplier advances or maintenance contracts or consulting fees. When I questioned Vanessa about specific transactions, her responses stayed surface level, dismissive. "Oh, that's necessary for better vendor terms." Or "that's a preventive maintenance contract that'll save us money long term." Details remained scarce. Supporting documents mysteriously delayed or missing entirely. Gerald dismissed my concerns whenever I raised them, his tone suggesting I was overreacting. "She's saving us money in the long run, Rachel. You need to trust her expertise." Patricia suggested I was being overly cautious, attributing my worry to fatigue and stress. "You're just exhausted, honey. Vanessa has an accounting degree. She knows what she's doing." Their immediate defense of Vanessa felt coordinated, rehearsed, like they'd discussed how to handle my questions before I even asked them. Shielding rather than clarifying, protecting rather than explaining, I began observing shifts in their attitude toward the operation. Discussions at family dinners moved away from production challenges or client relationships, focusing instead on revenue figures, potential liquidity, ways to access capital faster. Vanessa commented on account balances casually, as if they were her personal savings rather than working capital for a manufacturing business. Gerald brought up retirement planning again, calculating timelines based on current company valuation, talking about cashing out while the market was good. Patricia browsed real estate listings during visits to my house, talking about downsizing or relocating somewhere warmer, somewhere expensive, showing me properties that cost far more than their modest savings could afford. When I asked how they'd manage such a purchase, she'd smile vaguely and say something about finally getting what they deserved after years of family sacrifice. Family gatherings at my house became uncomfortable, filled with subtle probes about distributing responsibilities more evenly, about ensuring everyone shared in Grandpa Walter's success. Vanessa's gaze would linger on recent equipment purchases, her eyes assessing value rather than function, calculating resale prices instead of appreciating capability. The change accumulated quietly but persistently, building like pressure behind a dam. What Morrison Precision Tools represented to Grandpa Walter, what it meant to me, craftsmanship and commitment and honest work, now appeared to them as something entirely different. A convenient resource, liquid capital ready for redistribution, an asset to be liquidated rather than a legacy to be preserved. Their visits focused less on genuine support, more on implicit ownership, on possibilities for personal gain. I tried to downplay growing doubts, convinced myself suspicions stemmed from overwork and paranoia. They were family after all, relatives bound by shared history and blood. Questioning their motives felt disloyal, felt like I was becoming bitter and mistrustful, yet patterns persisted and multiplied. Unexplained deductions that Vanessa couldn't quite explain, postponed reconciliations that never seemed to get resolved, my direct access to certain accounts suddenly requiring her approval first. The financial transparency Grandpa Walter had always maintained eroded bit by bit, replaced by opacity and deflection. The business he'd cherished, the operation he'd built on transparency and integrity, no longer seemed sacred to them. It resembled an opportunity for quick benefit, legacy secondary to immediate advantage, principles less important than profit extraction. The unease settled deeper in my gut, a quiet alarm I couldn't fully silence, no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it away. Something was very wrong, and deep down, I knew it. I just didn't know how wrong, until the afternoon everything shattered. But they had no idea I was about to find out. And once I did, there would be no going back. I decided to pick up Emma and Tyler early that afternoon. Tyler had developed a minor cough during school. Nothing serious, but enough that I wanted to get him home for rest before it potentially worsened into something that would keep him up all night. Emma was thrilled at the unexpected early dismissal, bouncing in her seat as we drove away from the school. The drive followed our usual route past familiar streets and landmarks. On impulse, I turned toward Morrison Precision Tools to grab a folder I'd left behind in my office, some client specifications I wanted to review at home that evening. The kids were in good spirits, Emma chattering about her art project, while Tyler hummed tunelessly, his cough already sounding better. The parking area looked ordinary enough. A few employee cars remained despite the mid-afternoon hour. Nothing unusual for a manufacturing operation with staggered shifts. I parked in near the side entrance, told Emma and Tyler to wait in the car for just 2 minutes while I ran inside. "Keep the doors locked, okay? I'll be right back." Entering through the side door, the building seemed unusually hushed. No typical clatter from the production floor, no voices carrying over the ambient hum of ventilation systems. Most of the crew had left for the day, which made sense given the hour. I headed down the hallway toward my office, footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. But light spilling from the conference room caught my attention, a bright rectangle cutting across the dim hallway. The door stood partially open, muffled voices filtering out, too quiet to make out words, but loud enough to indicate people inside. My steps slowed. We didn't have any meetings scheduled for today. I'd checked the calendar that morning. I paused outside the door, then pushed it wider, the hinges giving a soft creak. Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa sat around the large conference table, documents scattered across the surface in organized piles. Vanessa held a pen poised over a stack of forms, her signature half completed on the top page. Invoices and transfer requests lay nearby, several bearing Morrison Precision Tools letterhead, with figures that jumped out immediately even from across the room. Tens of thousands of dollars, some amounts climbing higher. They looked up simultaneously, surprise freezing their movements like I'd caught them in a photograph. For a moment, nobody spoke, the silence stretching taut and uncomfortable. I stepped fully inside, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft click. "What exactly is this?" Vanessa set the pen down slowly, deliberately, gathering pages with careful movements. "Just routine payments, Rachel. Catching up on vendor balances." Her tone stayed level, practiced, but something in her eyes flickered. A calculation happening too fast to read. I approached the table, my heart rate picking up, adrenaline starting to flood my system. Scanning the top document, I saw a wire transfer authorization to an unfamiliar LLC, $50,000 for specialized consulting services. Another form beneath it showed $60,000 for raw material procurement to a different entity I'd never heard of. No corresponding purchase orders clipped to them, no quotes, no approval signatures except Vanessa's. My throat tightened, my fingers tingling as I picked up the papers. "These vendors aren't on our approved supplier list. Where are the competitive bids? Where are my approvals?" Gerald shifted in his chair, the leather creaking. Rachel, you're jumping to conclusions. Vanessa's streamlining processes. These are legitimate operational costs. You can't micromanage every transaction. Patricia reached for a folder, her voice taking on that soft but firm tone she used when she thought she knew better. We're trying to help lighten your load, honey. You need to trust us a little. We're family. Trust. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. I picked up another transfer authorization. This one for $45,000 to a consulting firm with an address that looked like a P.O. box. Help? This is moving large sums without my knowledge or approval. Explain the consulting services. Who provided them? What exactly did they do for $45,000? Vanessa's tone sharpened, her patience apparently wearing thin. You delegated finances to me, Rachel. I don't need your sign-off for every single transaction. These arrangements secure volume discounts and ensure supply chain stability. It's basic business management. Stability? I spread several forms across the table surface, my hands starting to shake with anger. I was struggling to contain. These companies have zero transaction history with us. I traced 2 of these addresses. They're P.O. boxes and vacant office suites. This isn't operational optimization, Vanessa. This is something else entirely. Gerald's face reddened, his jaw clenching. Enough. You're making accusations without proof. We've been more involved in this company than you want to acknowledge. Someone had to pick up the slack while you focused on playing factory supervisor. Patricia's eyes glistened with practiced tears. After everything we've done for this family, Rachel, you treat us like criminals. Like strangers. We raised you. We supported every choice you made. This is how you repay that. The emotional manipulation was obvious, textbook even, but it still stung. My voice rose despite my attempt to stay calm. Involved? You barely visited when Grandpa was alive. You complained about the shop constantly, and now this? I gestured at the mountain of suspicious documents. How long has this been going on? How much have you taken? Vanessa leaned back in her chair, arms crossing defensively. Taken? You're paranoid, Rachel. Running this place alone has made you suspicious of everyone who tries to help. I've kept operations afloat while you focused on your precious machines and your kids. Without me, this company would be drowning in missed payments and tax penalties. Afloat by draining accounts into shell companies. I grabbed another stack, flipping through invoices that all looked professionally formatted, but completely fraudulent. These aren't expenses, they're diversions. Theft. Gerald stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. Watch your words very carefully. We're your parents. We raised you, clothed you, supported you through that disaster of a marriage. Grandpa's will was fundamentally unfair, Rachel. He wasn't thinking clearly at the end. The medication clouded his judgment, made him paranoid and irrational. He was influenced by your constant presence, your manipulation. Patricia nodded emphatically, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that appeared from nowhere. Exactly. The medication affected his decision-making. Anyone can see that. He didn't mean to exclude us entirely from what he built. We provided emotional support and care for years while you were playing apprentice. That deserves recognition, deserves compensation. Vanessa jumped in, her voice taking on a righteous edge. I've managed these finances competently for months. I've earned equity in this company through my work and expertise. You've hoarded everything based on a flawed will from a sick old man. I deserve part ownership. We all do. The room heated quickly, multiple conversations overlapping, voices rising in competition. I demanded immediate access to all accounts, demanded every record, demanded they freeze all activity until a full audit could be completed. They refused, Gerald insisting we needed legal review first, claiming I couldn't just lock them out without due process. Patricia accused me of trying to tear apart what remained of our family over money, over greed that apparently I was projecting onto them. Vanessa claimed her financial management had actually improved company performance, that she'd earned her compensation through superior expertise, that an audit would only prove her competence. I countered with specifics I'd already uncovered. Missing backup documentation, altered transaction logs, payment patterns no honest manager would create. Gerald dismissed it all as my inexperience showing, my lack of business sophistication making me see conspiracy where there was only efficient management. The exchange turned raw and ugly. Vanessa declared outright that without her financial oversight, Morrison Precision Tools would have failed within months of Grandpa's death. Gerald threatened to involve regulatory authorities if I tried to restrict their access or challenged their management decisions. Patricia wept openly, claiming I was destroying our family bond over paranoid delusions and baseless suspicions. Finally, Gerald delivered the threat they'd apparently been building toward all along. We're filing to contest the will, Rachel. Undue influence, diminished capacity, improper execution. Plus our substantial contributions as direct heirs. A judge will see reason where you can't. Fair division of assets for everyone involved. Vanessa added, her voice cold and sharp. I've run things better than you ever could these past months. I should have controlling interest, maybe full ownership. We'll prove it in court. We'll bring in experts who'll testify about Grandpa's mental state, about your manipulation of a sick elderly man. They began collecting documents, moving with practiced coordination that suggested they'd planned this confrontation. Gerald warned me against interfering with their access to company systems or accounts until legal counsel advised next steps. Patricia took one last shot, her tears drying remarkably fast. I hope you can live with yourself, destroying your family like this. Over money, Rachel. Over pieces of paper and bank balances. The door closed behind them with heavy finality. I stood alone in the conference room, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, surrounded by scattered copies of fraudulent documents and transfer authorizations. The confrontation had exposed everything, stripped away pretense and revealed the calculated intent beneath their offers of help and family concern. They didn't view Grandpa Walter's legacy as something sacred to preserve. They saw it as divisible spoils, assets to be claimed, resources to be extracted and distributed according to their own sense of entitlement. Their support had been a pretext for control, their assistance a cover for theft. The fight had only begun. But as I stood there, as the shock started to fade and cold clarity replaced it, I realized something they hadn't considered. They'd just made a fatal mistake, and I was about to use it to destroy them completely. But first, I needed proof. Real, undeniable, federal-level proof. The kind that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as family misunderstanding. I didn't confront them again after that explosive meeting. Public accusations would only give them time to cover tracks, delete files, shift blame to each other or to innocent employees. Instead, I searched quietly for a professional who could dig deeper without alerting anyone inside the company or the family. Through a discreet recommendation from Thomas Chen, a longtime client who dealt with similar issues in his own business years ago, I connected with Paul Kendrick, a certified forensic accountant specializing in corporate fraud and embezzlement cases. His reputation was solid, his methods thorough, his discretion absolute. Our first meeting took place in his downtown Detroit office, a neutral and professional space with no connection to Morrison Precision Tools or anyone who might recognize me. I brought printed copies of the suspicious transactions I'd managed to save, plus access logs showing Vanessa making system changes outside normal business hours, modifications to approval workflows that should have required my authorization. Paul listened carefully, his gray eyes sharp and analytical, asking pointed questions about delegation of financial authorities, signature protocols, banking setup, segregation of duties. He took notes in a leather journal, his questions revealing decades of experience in unraveling exactly this type of scheme. He agreed to review everything under strict confidentiality, signing an engagement agreement that kept my name out of initial inquiries, protecting me if things somehow went wrong or if I decided to pull back. The process would take time, he warned. Thoroughness mattered more than speed. Rushing would leave gaps that defense attorneys could exploit. Over the following weeks, I lived a double life. During the day, I maintained normal operations at Morrison Precision Tools, interacting with Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa, as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't discovered their scheme. My smiles felt like masks, My casual conversation required conscious effort. At night, after Emma and Tyler were asleep, I worked with Paul. I exported financial data during off hours, using my administrative access to pull transaction histories, bank statements, vendor files. I scanned old documents from archived drives that Vanessa hadn't known existed, backups Grandpa Walter had maintained religiously. I forwarded emails that had seemed innocuous at the time but now raised massive red flags, correspondence about vendor relationships that didn't align with actual business needs. Paul analyzed everything from his end, using specialized forensic software to map fund flows, identify patterns, verify vendor legitimacy through corporate registration databases and credit reports. He cross-referenced IP addresses, tracked digital signatures, built timelines that showed coordination and intent. The early findings confirmed my worst fears and then exceeded them. Routine operational payments had been systematically rerouted to newly formed LLC shell companies, with no legitimate online presence, no business history, no actual operations. Addresses traced to commercial mail drops or vacant properties. Phone numbers led to disconnected lines or generic voicemail systems. Invoices had been generated for services never rendered. Consulting on process optimization that never happened. Bulk purchases of raw materials that never arrived at our facility. Maintenance contracts for equipment we didn't own. The documentation looked professional, convincingly real but entirely fraudulent. The network centered on Vanessa. She'd registered multiple shell entities using variations of her name or unrelated aliases, listing herself as managing member on state filing documents. Digital transaction approvals bore her credentials, timestamps matching her known login patterns and access times. But the scheme required multiple signatories for larger amounts due to banking protocols. Grandpa Walter had wisely established. Richard's distinctive signature appeared on physical checks for amounts below the electronic transfer threshold. Patricia's name showed on several electronic authorizations for transfers exceeding daily limits. Her credentials used to provide the required second approval. The coordination was clear, undeniable, systematic. Paul quantified the damage methodically, building spreadsheets that tracked every suspicious transaction, close to $600,000, diverted over 18 months, in carefully layered transactions, designed to avoid immediate detection. Some funds looped through multiple accounts before disappearing into personal holdings. Others paid directly for luxury items tracked through credit card records, vehicle purchases, home renovations, vacations to expensive destinations, all indirectly linked through forensic analysis. The mechanics of what they'd done crossed serious legal thresholds. Wire transfers between financial institutions in different states triggered federal oversight and jurisdiction. Using interstate banking systems for fraudulent purposes qualified as wire fraud under federal statute. Falsifying business records and concealing transactions from tax reporting added potential charges of tax evasion and fraud. Embezzlement from a corporate entity by officers or those in positions of trust carried enhanced penalties. I continued forwarding additional evidence as Paul requested it. Board minutes showing my limited involvement in day-to-day financial operations after delegation. Email correspondence where I'd expressed concerns about irregular transactions. Concerns that went unanswered or were deflected with vague explanations. Employee statements about unusual after-hours activity in the finance office. Paul cross-checked everything against standard accounting practices and regulatory requirements, highlighting deviations that no legitimate financial manager would make. He built the case layer by layer, creating timelines that illustrated escalation, charts that map many trails with precision, affidavits ready for submission to authorities. When his analysis was complete, he forwarded the comprehensive package through established channels to federal investigators, specialists in white-collar crime who handled such referrals routinely. No public announcements. No dramatic raids yet. The investigation opened quietly, federal agents reviewing evidence independently, verifying Paul's findings, building their own case files. Paul assured me the foundation was concrete. Digital footprints and paper trails don't vanish easily, Rachel. They were arrogant, sloppy in places, They thought you'd never look this closely. The evidence is overwhelming. Reviewing his final report alone, one evening, after Emma and Tyler were asleep, and the house was finally quiet, the full picture crystallized in my mind. They weren't just stealing money, they'd constructed an elaborate, ongoing criminal enterprise, assuming I'd never dig deep enough to uncover it, assuming family loyalty would keep me from really investigating. But what struck me, what changed everything about my strategy, was simpler and more elegant than revenge. Corporate ownership carries legal responsibility for past actions. Transfer the title to new owners, and they inherit the entire record. Assets, yes, but also debts, obligations, and liabilities. Criminal exposure tied to company operations doesn't evaporate with a signature change on corporate documents. It follows the entity, attaches to whoever controls it when authorities act. If Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa succeeded in forcing a settlement, if they signed documents accepting full legal control of Morrison Precision Tools, every fraudulent transaction committed under its name would become theirs to answer for. The federal investigation already underway would simply pivot to target the current principals, the new owners who'd just taken legal responsibility for all corporate activities. They'd walk straight into accountability they never anticipated, never even imagined possible. Paul verified the legal principle when I laid out my idea. Pre-existing criminal liability, discovered after ownership transfer, still attaches to those in control when charges are filed. Courts have recognized this repeatedly in business succession and sale cases. If they own the company when the indictments come down, they own the consequences. The strategy formed with crystal clarity. Let them push for everything. Let them believe family pressure and emotional manipulation and legal threats would force me to compromise, to give them pieces of what Grandpa Walter built, give them the victory they demanded on paper, the complete victory they thought they'd won. Then watch as federal consequences caught up with them, as they discovered too late what they'd really claimed. I filed Paul's reports in a secure location, deleted temporary working files from my personal systems, resumed normal routines at Morrison Precision Tools, outwardly cooperative, inwardly prepared, waiting for them to make their next move. The waiting began, and I'd never felt more certain of anything in my life. Let them think they'd won. Let them celebrate their victory. Let them sign their names to ownership documents with smiles on their faces. Because when those federal agents walked into the courtroom, when those charges finally came down, it would be far too late for them to escape what they'd done. The mediation sessions took place in a plain, windowless conference room at a large law firm in downtown Detroit, far removed from the shop and my home. Neutral ground, they called it, though nothing about the process felt neutral to me. I arrived early each time, dressed conservatively in simple clothes that made me look smaller and more defeated than I felt, letting visible fatigue show in my posture and movements. Across the polished table, Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa presented a united front, their body language coordinated, their expressions confident. They'd hired Harrison Cole, an attorney with a reputation for aggressive client advocacy, someone who wore expensive suits and smiled like a shark, sensing blood in the water. Harrison outlined their demands with practiced confidence, reading from prepared documents in a voice that suggested this was all perfectly reasonable. Complete and undivided title to the house. Grandpa Walter left me, both vehicles currently in my name, and absolute controlling interest in Morrison Precision Tools, including all assets, accounts, client relationships, and intellectual property. Everything. They wanted everything. I listened without pushing back, nodding occasionally as terms were read aloud, my hands folded quietly on the table. When Harrison paused and asked for my position, I spoke softly, my voice deliberately weary. I'm ready to settle. I'll transfer everything to them. I just need this finished. I can't keep fighting. Harrison paused mid-note, his expensive pen hovering over paper, reviewing his document to confirm he'd heard correctly. Vanessa exchanged quick glances with my parents, surprise giving way to barely concealed triumph. They'd expected resistance, prepared for battle, brought their attorney ready for prolonged negotiation. Instead, I was offering them complete surrender. Harrison pressed for details on timelines, asset valuations, ensuring no loose ends or complications. I agreed to everything. Full transfer within 30 days, all necessary documentation prepared and executed, clean title to all properties and business interests. They could have it all. Margaret Ellis sat beside me throughout these sessions, her leather portfolio full of documents she'd prepared over weeks of careful work. She'd compiled detailed timelines, gathered employee statements, assembled financial summaries that challenged every one of their claims. Evidence of their fraud sat in organized folders, ready to present, ready to fight. Now her pen hovered motionless over blank pages, her preparation rendered useless by my capitulation. During breaks, she cornered me in empty hallways or unused offices, her voice urgent and pleading. Rachel, this gives away your entire future. We can counter their arguments with strong evidence. We can win this. Please think about Emma and Tyler, about their financial stability, their inheritance. I maintained the weary expression I'd practiced, repeating that prolonged legal battles would hurt everyone more. That I couldn't put my children through years of family warfare. That I just wanted peace. She argued quietly but intensely about asset protection, long-term security, the precedent this would set, how I'd regret this decision for the rest of my life. I thanked her sincerely for her dedication and effort, acknowledged her concerns, but held firm on my decision to accept their terms. She looked at me like I was drowning and refusing the life preserver she kept throwing. News traveled fast through mutual contacts and the small business community. Friends who'd known me for years began reaching out constantly, their messages increasingly worried. Jennifer, someone from my old neighborhood who I'd known since elementary school, left long voicemails, her voice cracking with concern that I'd lost all perspective under pressure, that grief and stress had broken something essential in me. Marcus, a business acquaintance who'd watched Morrison Precision Tools grow over decades, drove over unannounced one evening, insisting we talk strategy over coffee at my kitchen table, while Emma and Tyler watched a movie in the living room. "You're making a mistake you can't undo, Rachel," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug. "Fight for what's rightfully yours. Fight for what Walter wanted." Text messages and calls piled up in my phone. Friends shared their fears that I was depressed, that isolation had clouded my judgment, that conceding meant admitting defeat in a way I'd never recover from psychologically. Offers came from everywhere: loans for extended legal fees, introductions to more aggressive attorneys who specialized in contested wills, even suggestions to request mental health evaluations to delay proceedings and buy more time to reconsider. Everyone, absolutely everyone, assumed the stress and responsibility had worn me down completely, that I was making this decision from a place of exhaustion and defeat, rather than strategy. I responded briefly to each person, thanking them for their support and concern, appreciating their care, but reaffirming my decision to settle quickly. No lengthy debates, no hints at deeper reasons or hidden plans. Silence and apparent surrender preserved the illusion perfectly. Meanwhile, I poured every spare moment into Emma and Tyler, creating memories and connections that felt more precious than ever. School pickups turned into extended adventures. We'd stop at playgrounds where I pushed swings until my arms ached, joined games of tag across grass fields until we all collapsed laughing. We explored local nature trails, collecting colorful fall leaves or skipping smooth stones across pond surfaces, counting how many jumps each one made. Home evenings revolved entirely around their choices and happiness. I baked chocolate chip cookies from scratch, letting them stir the thick batter and sneak chocolate chips, not caring about the mess spreading across counters. Dinner requests were granted without question or concern for nutritional balance. Homemade pizza with too many toppings assembled together at the counter, their small hands pressing dough and arranging pepperoni. Tacos built side by side, laughter filling the kitchen as salsa ended up on noses and shredded cheese dusted hair. Bedtime routines stretched longer than ever. I read their favorite books with different voices for each character, answered endless why questions about stars and dinosaurs, and where people go when they die, lay beside them in the dim glow of nightlights, discussing dreams and fears and hopes. Sophia confided small worries about school friends and spelling tests. Tyler shared wild inventions he wanted to build someday. Impossible machines that defied physics but captured perfect childhood imagination. Those quiet connections grounded me, reminded me with absolute clarity why every choice mattered, why protecting them meant more than protecting assets or fighting for pride. Weekends brought simple outings, trips to farmers' markets for fresh fruit and local honey, libraries for new books that we'd read together that night, drives to quiet parks where we picnicked and talked about everything and nothing. I captured these moments mentally, storing them against the uncertainty ahead, building a foundation of love and security that no legal document could touch or diminish. The concern from others continued unabated. Margaret scheduled additional review sessions, presenting revised projections of what life would look like post-settlement, showing me in stark numbers how little I'd have left, how I'd struggled to maintain even basic security for my children. Friends organized what felt like informal interventions over lunch at local restaurants, multiple people teaming up to plead for reconsideration, to convince me I was sacrificing too much for a peace that wouldn't actually last. Their fear was genuine, born from caring about me and wanting to protect me from what they saw as a catastrophic mistake. I attended these meetings, listened patiently to every argument, acknowledged every concern with real gratitude for their care, then restated my willingness to sign whatever documents finalized the settlement. Outward compliance masked inner certainty. Those days with Emma and Tyler built quiet strength that no amount of lost assets could diminish. Their unconditional trust, their daily hugs, their innocent questions about why everyone was sad, all reinforced my focus on what truly couldn't be taken. Whatever legal documents said, whatever Gerald and Patricia and Vanessa claimed, our small family unit remained intact and strong. The final hearing date approached steadily, marked on my calendar, looming larger with each passing day. My routine stayed consistent, emphasizing normalcy for Emma and Tyler above all else. School mornings proceeded like always, afternoons filled with homework and snacks, evenings ending with extra bedtime stories, and whispered assurances in the dark that everything would be okay, that Mommy had a plan, that they didn't need to worry. I was ready. More ready than Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa could possibly imagine, because while they prepared to celebrate their victory, I was preparing to watch them step directly into federal prison. The day of the final hearing arrived under typical Michigan gray skies, the courthouse looming downtown, like it had witnessed 1,000 family tragedies and would witness 1,000 more. I walked in alone, dressed simply in a clean blouse and dark slacks. Nothing fancy, nothing that suggested I was preparing for battle. Margaret Ellis met me at the steps, her face tight with last-minute concern. One final attempt to change my mind, etched in the lines around her eyes. I reassured her with a nod, a small smile that probably looked sad and resigned. Everything was proceeding exactly as we'd discussed. She didn't need to know there were discussions she wasn't part of, plans I couldn't share even with my own attorney. Inside the courtroom, the air felt thick and heavy, oppressive in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table with Harrison Cole, all of them looking polished and confident. Gerald wore a new suit, expensive Italian wool in charcoal gray. Patricia had pearls at her throat I'd never seen before, genuine ones that probably cost thousands. Vanessa's designer outfit screamed success and vindication. They looked like they were attending a celebration rather than a legal proceeding, like this was coronation day rather than a courtroom hearing. Their eyes tracked me as I entered, small victorious smiles playing on their lips, glances exchanged that communicated triumph without words. They'd won. Rachel had folded, the weak link had broken completely. Judge Rebecca Martinez presided, a no-nonsense woman with 25 years on the bench and eyes that had seen every scheme and lie people could devise. She reviewed the settlement agreement aloud, her voice level and professional, making sure every term was stated clearly for the record. Full transfer of the residential property on Maple Drive to Gerald and Patricia Morrison. Complete transfer of both vehicles, a 2019 sedan and 2021 SUV, to Patricia Morrison. Total transfer of all ownership interest in Morrison Precision Tools, including all assets, accounts, equipment, client relationships, intellectual property, and goodwill, to Vanessa Morrison, effective immediately upon execution of documents. The judge looked at me directly, her gaze searching. Ms. Morrison, do you understand these terms? Do you agree to them voluntarily, without coercion or duress? My voice came out clear and steady, surprisingly strong for someone who was supposed to be broken. Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. I agree voluntarily. Harrison Cole's side barely contained their satisfaction. Vanessa whispered something to Patricia, who covered what looked like a smirk with her hand. Gerald sat back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, the posture of someone who'd finally received what they'd always deserved. I signed where the court clerk indicated, page after page, transferring everything Grandpa Walter had built, everything he'd entrusted to me. My hand stayed steady throughout, my signature clear and legible, no hesitation or trembling. Each page represented a piece of his legacy moving into their control, legal ownership transferring with every stroke of the pen. Margaret sat beside me in absolute silence, her expression pained, looking like she was watching a loved one make a terrible mistake in slow motion, but was powerless to stop it. She'd fought so hard, prepared so thoroughly, and now watched her client give away everything. The judge prepared to conclude the hearing, her gavel raised slightly, ready to bring this sad family matter to its official close. Harrison Cole was already organizing his papers, probably calculating his substantial fee, preparing to escort his victorious clients out. Then the heavy courtroom doors swung open. 2 federal agents entered, their footsteps heavy and deliberate on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. They wore dark suits, their badges visible on their belts, their expressions professionally neutral. They moved with the confident purpose of people who'd done this many times before, who knew exactly what came next. They approached the defense table directly, ignoring everyone else in the room. One agent handed a sealed envelope to Harrison Cole. His confident expression froze mid-smile as he took it, confusion flickering before he tore it open and pulled out the documents inside. I watched his face change, watched color drain from his skin so fast it was almost comical. His eyes scanned the pages, moving faster, going back to read again as if he'd misunderstood. His mouth opened slightly, closed, opened again. He leaned toward his clients, his hand trembling slightly now, and whispered into the space between them. 5 words I couldn't hear but could read in the devastation that followed. Vanessa reacted first, a sharp, piercing scream that cut through the courtroom like a knife, her hand flying to her mouth too late to contain it. Patricia's head snapped toward Gerald, her fingers clutching his sleeve, her perfectly composed face crumbling into something between shock and horror. Gerald just stared straight ahead, completely frozen, his confident posture collapsing as reality crashed into him like a freight train. The lead agent stepped forward, addressing them formally, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Federal warrants had been issued based on months of investigation, he explained. Evidence of systematic wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, using interstate banking systems to facilitate theft from a corporate entity. Custody would begin immediately. For a moment, chaos threatened to erupt. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping back loudly, protesting at full volume that this was all a mistake. All my doing a setup orchestrated by their jealous, vindictive sister. Patricia sobbed, reaching toward me as if I could somehow fix this, as if I would want to, her mascara already starting to run in dark streaks. Gerald muttered denials, his voice breaking, hands raised as if to physically push away what was happening. Bailiffs moved in smoothly to maintain order, while the agents proceeded with their work, producing handcuffs, standard procedure for white-collar arrests of this magnitude. Vanessa cried and protested as metal closed around her wrists. Patricia wept openly, her careful makeup destroyed, her pearl necklace somehow looking obscene against her collapsing face. Gerald's denials faded to shocked silence as he too was secured and informed of his rights. I remained seated throughout, hands folded quietly in my lap, watching without expression as they were processed and prepared for transport. The ring Grandpa Walter had left me felt warm on my finger, almost alive, like he was there with me, approving, understanding what I'd done, and why. Judge Martinez banged her gavel sharply, calling for order, adjourning the hearing immediately given the extraordinary circumstances. Harrison Cole gathered papers mechanically, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His victory turned to ash and potential legal liability in the span of minutes. They were escorted out past staring spectators, Vanessa's cries echoing down the marble hallway, Patricia's sobs fading as distance grew, Gerald's shell-shocked silence, somehow louder than any protest. Court officers cleared the room efficiently, but the energy of what had just happened lingered like electricity in the air. Margaret turned to me slowly, her eyes wide with dawning realization. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. The question was written clearly on her face. I met her gaze steadily. I needed them to take everything, Margaret. Legal ownership, complete control, all of it. Because corporate liability doesn't disappear with a title transfer. It follows the entity, and when federal investigators have evidence of systematic fraud, they charge whoever controls the company when the indictments come down. She stared at me, understanding flooding her expression. You knew. The whole time, you knew what they'd done, you let them walk right into it. I gave them exactly what they demanded, I said quietly. Everything they wanted. Everything they deserved. Outside, reporters had already gathered somehow, word of federal arrests leaking fast. Margaret guided me out through a side exit she'd arranged in advance, just in case. The cold Detroit air felt clean and sharp after the recycled atmosphere of the courtroom. I didn't look back. I just walked to my car, drove to pick up Emma and Tyler from school, and took them for ice cream, even though it was a weekday and dinner would be in an hour. Because some victories need to be celebrated quietly, privately, with the people who matter most. Months passed before the full legal resolution came. The federal case moved swiftly once prosecutors took over. Their evidence overwhelming and meticulously documented. Digital trails that couldn't be erased. Signed documents bearing authentic signatures, shell company records that traced directly to Vanessa with Gerald and Patricia's clear participation and approval. They tried separate defenses initially, each attempting to minimize their own involvement. Vanessa claimed ignorance, insisted she'd been following what she thought were legitimate business practices. My parents insisted they'd simply followed Vanessa's lead, trusted her expertise, had no idea the transactions were fraudulent, but the coordination was too clear, the pattern too systematic. Email exchanges recovered from servers showed explicit discussions about hiding transactions from me, about creating justification documents after the fact, about how much they could take before I'd notice. The conspiracy was undeniable. Plea deals came eventually, after their attorneys realized trial would only result in longer sentences. The prosecutors had built an airtight case, and federal conviction rates for cases that went to trial hovered near 95%. Fighting was futile and expensive. Prison sentences followed. Federal facilities, not minimum security country clubs, but actual prisons where white-collar criminals served time alongside other offenders. Vanessa received 5 years. Gerald and Patricia each got 3 years, their ages and lesser participation earning some leniency. Full restitution was ordered, meaning liquidation of whatever assets they had left after legal fees consumed most of their savings. The house they'd planned to retire in sold at auction. Vehicles got repossessed. Personal belongings disposed of to raise funds. They'd spend years after release repaying debt they could never fully satisfy. Morrison Precision Tools, which they'd owned for approximately 47 minutes between my signature and their arrest, was seized as part of the criminal proceedings, frozen pending resolution. After their convictions, after restitution calculations, the company was released from federal hold. I started over with something smaller and cleaner. A new entity, Morrison Legacy Manufacturing, leased modest space in the same industrial park where Grandpa Walter had first expanded decades ago. The space smelled like fresh paint and possibility instead of cutting fluid in history, but it felt right. Loyal former employees returned one by one, drawn by reputation and relationships rather than salary offers I couldn't yet match. Mike, who'd worked for Grandpa Walter for 30 years, came back first. Then Sandra, then James, then others, people who valued integrity over corporate benefits packages. First contracts trickled in from old clients, who valued reliability and remembered what Morrison quality meant. Small orders initially, test runs to see if the new operation could maintain the standards the old company had established. We delivered perfectly, on time, exactly to specification. Word spread, more contracts followed. Growth came slowly but sustainably. No hidden debts, no compromised books, no shell companies or fraudulent transactions. Clean operation, transparent finances, honest relationships with vendors and clients. Exactly the way Grandpa Walter had taught me. The custody situation simplified dramatically once the criminal convictions were finalized. Courts granted me sole legal and physical custody of Emma and Tyler with no contest. Supervised visitation was technically available, but my parents and Vanessa chose distance instead. No calls, no letters, no attempts at reconciliation or relationship repair with their grandchildren and niece. Some bonds, once shattered, can't be repaired. Blood ties severed when trust broke beyond any possibility of healing. Emma asked a few times in the early months why we didn't see Grandma and Grandpa anymore. Why Aunt Vanessa didn't come around. I explained as honestly as I could in age-appropriate terms. They did something wrong, hurt people and broke laws, and had to face consequences. We loved them but couldn't have them in our lives anymore. Tyler, younger and more adaptable, accepted this and moved on quickly. Emma processed it more slowly, but eventually her questions stopped, and our trio became our complete family unit. Looking back now, years later, the pain from my divorce to Derek feels like essential preparation for what came after. That first betrayal taught me resilience, taught me the difference between obligation and genuine connection. Being betrayed twice, once by a spouse and once by my own blood family, stripped away every illusion about loyalty and relationships. Yet, somehow it clarified what actually mattered. Strength isn't endless fighting, isn't refusing to bend or break. Sometimes real strength is strategic patience, letting consequences unfold naturally while protecting what truly deserves protection. Sometimes the strongest move is giving people exactly what they demand and letting them choke on it. The marriage ending taught me I could survive alone, could build something meaningful without romantic partnership. The family betrayal taught me that chosen family, people who earn trust through actions rather than claiming it through genetics, matters infinitely more than blood relations. Morrison Legacy Manufacturing grew steadily over the following years. We'd never be the size Grandpa Walter's operation reached at its peak, and that was fine. Smaller meant more control, meant knowing every employee personally, meant maintaining quality without compromise. The clients we served valued precision and reliability, kept coming back, referred others. Emma and Tyler grew up visiting the shop just like I had, learning about manufacturing and business and integrity through observation and participation. Emma showed artistic talent, designed a logo for Morrison Legacy that captured something essential about craft and heritage. Tyler developed mechanical intuition, could diagnose machine problems by sound alone, possessed that same instinctive understanding of how things worked that Grandpa Walter had tried to teach my father and sister decades ago. Those visits strengthened our family bonds, created memories in the same environment where my best memories had formed, continued a legacy in a new form. We'd have company barbecues where employees brought families, where Emma and Tyler played with workers' kids, where the line between business and community blurred in the best possible way. I built relationships with vendors based on honesty and fair dealing. We paid invoices on time, communicated clearly about needs and constraints, treated suppliers as partners rather than adversaries. They responded with loyalty and flexibility, with rush deliveries when emergencies arose, with quality materials at fair prices. The difference between operating with integrity versus operating for maximum extraction became clear in every interaction, every transaction, every relationship. When you treat people right, they treat you right in return. Simple principle, but apparently one my family had never understood or valued. Years after the convictions, after my parents and Vanessa had been released from federal prison, and presumably rebuilt lives somewhere far from Detroit, I received a letter, just one, forwarded through attorneys. Patricia had written it, her handwriting shaky, the paper cheap. She expressed regret, claimed they'd been desperate, and made terrible choices. Asked if someday there might be possibility for forgiveness and relationship restoration. She wanted to know Emma and Tyler, wanted to be part of their lives, promised everything would be different. I read it twice, sitting alone in my office, at Morrison Legacy, after everyone else had gone home. I felt the weight of her words, recognized genuine remorse beneath the desperation. Part of me, the part that remembered childhood and family holidays and moments before everything broke, wanted to respond with openness. But I thought about Emma and Tyler, about the stability they built, about the life we'd created without that toxicity. I thought about Grandpa Walter, and what he'd taught me about honor and protecting what matters most. I wrote back a single sentence. Some choices have permanent consequences. I wish you peace, but we won't be in contact again. Then I filed the letter away and went home to have dinner with my kids, to help with homework, to read bedtime stories in the quiet house we built together. If you faced broken trust from those supposed to stand by you unconditionally, from family or partners who betrayed rather than supported you, I want you to know something important. Rising again is possible. The path forward exists, even when it's not visible in the immediate aftermath of betrayal. Stand firm for what's right, for protecting the innocent ones counting on you, for prioritizing your well-being and theirs above guilt or obligation. Healing doesn't come from holding on to bitterness or seeking revenge, though justice has its place. Healing comes from building forward unburdened, from choosing life on honest terms, from surrounding yourself with people who prove through actions that they deserve your trust. Some bonds can't be salvaged. Some relationships damage more than they nourish. Cutting them free isn't weakness or failure. It's choosing clarity over confusion, health over toxicity, future over past. That's what I did. I let Gerald, Patricia, and Vanessa take everything they demanded. I watched them sign documents they thought made them winners. I sat quietly while federal agents explained exactly what they'd really claimed. Then I walked away with the only things that actually mattered. My children, my integrity, my peace, and a legacy rebuilt on foundations that couldn't be shaken by greed or betrayal. I gave them everything material, they gave me everything essential, and I've never once looked back.